Good morning, everyone. The last video that I did, the complete astrotheology video, is creeping up on 2,000 views in 2 days. It's fantastic. It's the one video you could share to everyone. Like, you just need that one video that explains everything. But of course, there's a lot that's not in the video. Now, I've got my good friend Lisa coming on, and she's been on a couple times, and every time she comes on, you guys really enjoy it. So she is welcome on whenever she wants, whenever she has new stuff. We'll make it happen ASAP. So today, the title of this is Micah and Lisa talk planetary symbols, the truth about Exodus, and Nimrod and Semiremis. So let me just bring her on and we'll get started. So here we go. Hey, girl.
Hi, good to see you again. It's good to be back.
It's good to have you back, too.
All right, let's jump right into it. Like I said, your viewers
Sure.
should really
Do you
like
want to
this.
share your screen with the presentation?
Uh,
I know
uh,
you emailed it to me, but if I share it, then I have to control it. And I can't
that's okay.
physically.
You do it because I actually don't know how to share it. And the last time I tried, I kept knocking
Oh,
myself off the camera. So yeah, I just rather have you do it because it just makes it easier.
all right. Okay. Then just bear with me. Just give us a little intro for today while I download this and then put it
Sure,
up.
absolutely. Take your time. What I'm going to do, as we spoke of earlier, is your viewers should find this video very, very interesting. I'm going to take the planetary symbols and I'm going to discuss what they actually mean and how and why they are drawn and written the way that they are, because they have a very specific meaning and it's really quite amazing. And then from there, I'm going to go into, as I said, the story about the Exodus in the Bible, because many people say that there's no documented evidence that an Exodus didn't really exist. And there actually is Egyptian
Mhm.
evidence, documented historical evidence by an Egyptian historian. His name
Mhm.
is I think you pronounce it Manetho, or it's Manetho, Manetho.
Mhm.
Um, he documented actual evidence of an exodus in Egypt, but it is not how it is portrayed in the Bible. It is over a much longer period of
So what I
time.
like
Well,
to say the Bible is,
mhm.
when you're kind of like when you watch a movie and it says based on a true story and you know that Hollywood beefed it up and changed it a little bit. That's basically what the Bible is. These are
Well,
stories based on things that could have particularly happened but did not happen in the exact way. It's the
well,
difference
what
between when you take something from like a book to a movie and there's always changes. So what do you think about that?
Well, here's the problem with people that take it on face historical value. When people read the scriptures and they think it is an actual literal account of historical events. And we discussed this before, it's not. It's an allegory. And an allegory, by definition, what an allegory does is it can, not always, it can sometimes be completely made up, but usually an allegory will take real persons, real places, or real events, and it will add a mythos behind them. It will
Mm-hmm.
add a story behind them that pertains a spiritual message. So
Right. I
even
mean,
though
like for example, with my book series, right? My
exactly
character my characters are going all over the world. Just because they're in Paris one time and they see the
doesn't mean
Eiffel
that Paris
Tower,
isn't real. Yes.
exactly. It
Yeah.
just means that the story is molded around real places. I didn't create Lord of the Rings or freaking
Mm.
any of that kind of stuff or Game of Thrones. I didn't invent a
Uh,
new world.
exactly. Now, like there are real people, there are real characters listed in the scripture. There's real places, there's real
Mhm.
events that happen. I'll give you one that I didn't even mention on the slides. One is the Tower of Babel. The Tower of Babel was a real thing. There was an actual tower, and the name of the tower, what it was called an Etemenaki. E T E Etemaki, Etemenaki. What that word actually means in ancient Mesopotamia, it meant the foundation of the heavens and earth. And what
Mhm.
that tower, and it was built and it was finished. And what and it's actually located 90 miles south of Baghdad. in Iraq, right where it would be when it was Babylon. Okay. And that tower was an ancient dedication to the god Moloch. And we know this because they found the ruins of that tower, and on the walls of the ruins, it is inscribed that it's dedicated to Moloch. And the
You know,
one who finished it was Nebuchadnezzar II. It took hundreds of years to finish. But the point is, it was a very, very tall tower. It was not built to try and reach the heavens. God didn't, you know, wipe everybody down and
you
confound.
understand that me being raised as a Jew growing up, I was told that the tower was completely real. It was exactly how it happened. And it was so tall that if you
It is
dropped
a real
a brick,
tower, but and it wasn't very tall, but
they would tell you that the tower was so tall that if you dropped a brick from the top of where they were constructing, it would take an entire year for it to hit the ground. That's what they try to tell you. That's insane. But absolutely, there's places. Excuse me, I'm getting over a virus right now.
Me too.
Talking,
I hear my voice too.
when they're talking about, for example, like it is easier for a camel to go through a needle than for a man to enter the kingdom of God. There is a place called the Eye of the Needle. It's in Israel. It's a small walled. It's a doorway. It's a pathway, and it leads into the city. And what they would have to do, the reason they actually wrote that metaphor in there, is because the camels, with all their shit hanging off of them, couldn't walk through it. They had to take everything off the camel and walk this animal alone directly through the eye of the needle and then put everything back on.
That's funny.
So absolutely. So let me go ahead and I'll present your PowerPoint, because your PowerPoints are always great. Bear with me 1 second. Lisa, while I'm presenting this and you're telling me to scroll, I can't physically see you, so we're just going to have a discussion, okay? All I can see is the presentation.
That's fine. Are you able to scroll up just a little bit so we can see the perfect, just so I can see the names of the symbols? Okay. Now, what you see on the screen is your basic symbology for the planets. The top three are the three main ones. It's the symbol for the sun, the symbol for the moon, and the symbol for the earth. Now, the earth is sometimes represented as you see it within a cross within a circle. Sometimes it is just a cross. Okay.
Right. This is what you see behind Jesus' head every time.
Exactly. Some also this almost a lot of Catholics use it as a sun symbol, the cross within the earth. It is actually the symbol for the earth, or cross more or less is a symbol for the earth. These symbols have very specific meaning. The sun in ancient esoteric knowledge, ancient esoteric mystery schools, the sun represents the soul. Okay. The moon represents the mind. The earth represents the body. This is a holy trinity. There's just like many holy trinities that we discussed before, where you have logic with emotion and then action is,
you have it with the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit.
Correct.
You have Isis, Horus, and Set.
Yes, masculine energy, feminine energy.
In Jews, you have Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. There's always a trinity.
Absolutely.
In fact, if you talk to some rabbis, they will tell you that Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob is the Jewish trinity.
Yes. The energy of three is the source of creation. You need a masculine energy, a feminine energy, and that births, and the child is always masculine, but it births a Christ child. It's masculine, feminine, and when you talk about the human brain, it pertains to logic, the masculine, emotion, the feminine, and that births action, the physical action. Okay.
So the sun, I'm assuming, would represent the male, and the moon would be the feminine, right?
Yes, the sun is the soul, that's masculine. The moon is the feminine. That the moon is the mind, feminine, and then the earth is the body. It's the human body. That's the physical action. Now, what I found fascinating was every planetary symbol that you see below, Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, they are all comprised. Each of them are comprised of two or more of the symbols listed above.
The reason she has these five guys, Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn, the reason she has this in that order, by the way, is because these are the five planets they knew at the time. Now, understand this too, is that they didn't understand They didn't know Pluto, Uranus, and
Neptune.
Neptune. That was it. Pluto, Uranus, and Neptune. They didn't know that. So when they're talking about the Elohim, or when you're talking about the seven planets they knew about the time, it was Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, in that order, because that's the order. Saturn is on the outside. That's why it rules everything. It takes 30 years.
Exactly.
And it also included the sun and the moon. They actually considered the sun and the moon planets at the time.
That is absolutely correct. And the reason that I only used these 5 planets plus the sun and the moon is because they are categorized in ancient esoteric knowledge. They are categorized as the 7 heavens or the 7 archons. And as you said, Saturn is the head, it is the leader of them. And a lot of astrology is based around the energy of these 5 planets plus the sun and the moon. Now, this is where it gets very interesting. I said each of these 5 symbols. I know there's 6 symbols on the screen, and that's because if you look at Mars originally was designed as the circle with the cross above it, just like the masculine symbol. And then it kind of changed over time to the circle and the arrow. Your basic symbol for a male, just as Venus is the basic symbol for a female. So each of these 5 planets is comprised of 2 or more of the symbols above, whether it's the cross, the moon, or the sun. And I'm going to show you exactly how. We're going to start with Saturn. Okay. We're going to start with Big Daddy Saturn, who is the chief. Saturn, who is Saturn? Saturn is the same thing as the Canaanite god El, who is also Yahweh.
Saturn is El. Saturn is Kronos.
That is
Saturn
correct. He is Kronos.
See? Saturn is,
He is Father Time. He is the demiurge, Yaldabaoth. What Saturn does is Saturn traps you in physicality. Saturn binds the mind to the physical world unless he is overcome. We'll get to that in a moment. But when it comes to Saturn, as I said, he is the demiurge. He is Yahweh. He is El. He is the god of this world. He is the god of physicality. So Saturn's symbol, if you notice, it is the cross at the top. Okay, now the cross is earth. It is the body. The cross is earth. Now notice the symbol below Saturn. It is the moon. It is the cross above the moon. What that is stating for Saturn is matter over mind. It is stating a material existence with material being promoted. It is promoting matter over the mind. Now let's move on to Jupiter. Jupiter, who is Jupiter? Jupiter is Jupiter. He is Zeus. He is the Piscean savior. Jesus, Jupiter. I'm a Jupiterian myself. I'm Pisces. I am a typical Pisces, by the way. I have almost every category that states that someone has for a Pisces with, likes, dislikes, whatnot. I have all of it. I am a Pisces through and
I like how Jupiter and Saturn both, you could see the numbers 4 and 5 because they represent the 4th and the 5th too.
That is correct. Now, if you notice Jupiter, what is Jupiter? Jupiter is the age of belief. And what it is just how Saturn is matter over mind. It is focused on the material over the mental plane. Jupiter is the opposite. Jupiter, you see the moon at the top and the earth at the bottom. Jupiter is mind over matter. And that is what Jesus taught. That's what the Piscean savior taught. He taught enlightenment. He taught not to be consumed with that of the physical world, but to go to your mind, go higher. And the reason that Jupiter is mind over matter and Saturn is matter over mind is because together they are opposites of each other. They represent a balance. Jupiter is the balance.
Would you say they're opposites, or would you just call it a polarity?
That, in other words, yes, a polarity. Absolutely. That's actually a better word.
Because they do work together to give you a complete picture.
Exactly.
They're not diametrically opposed that it has to be one over the other.
Exactly. Jupiter is like you said, is the polarity to Saturn. And what they represent, why they are next to each other and why they are symbolized like that, why is because the purpose of that is they represent, like everything else in the cosmos, a a harmony, a balance. You have to find a balance between the two of these. Jupiter balances Saturn, whereas Saturn is fully focused on the mind over matter. Jupiter is fully focused on the whereas Saturn fully focused on the matter over the mind, Jupiter on the mind over the matter. Together, if they're in harmony, they make a perfect balance to each other.
And it's interesting too if you think about it, because Saturn. Okay, so nowadays I believe they'll tell you that Aquarius is ruled by Uranus or Uranus, but back in the day, it was Saturn. So you had Capricorn and Aquarius that was ruled by Saturn.
Yes, as far as I know, Aquarius is ruled by Saturn. Yes.
Right. So you have Aquarius ruled by Saturn, and then the next sign over is Pisces ruled by Jupiter. So they're actually connecting signs on the zodiac. They're connecting energies.
But let's go back to Saturn real quick. As I said, Saturn is material over mind. You have mentioned before in many of your videos how the Jews are Saturnian in their nature. They are they worship Saturn. That's what Yahweh is. He is Saturn. He is the God of the physical world, not the absolute, not the creator of all, but the creator of physicality. Okay. And even Yahweh, even Yaldabeth, Kronos, all of them, they come from the all. They come from the creator of all. Okay, everything does. So that's why the Jews are looking for and still are looking for a material Messiah. They expect a Messiah that is going to reign as a military leader, supreme on this earth. Not someone that they weren't looking for a savior that's going to open and broaden your mind to the higher realms. They were looking for a material.
The Jews during Passover, there's a section during Passover where I can't remember the exact section because I haven't done Passover in a very long time. But I'm pretty sure it's either after the second glass of wine or after dinner or during dinner, the actual dinner of Passover. That remember Passover, it's only the first 2 nights that you actually go through the Seder. In Hebrew, Seder means order, where you go through all of that. But the Jews actually do at one point. What they do, I think it's during dinner, is you leave the front door wide open for Elijah or the Messiah to come in and have some wine with you.
Interesting.
And it's interesting too because Saturn is El.
Absolutely.
And Elohim is a plural in Hebrew. It's putting an S at the end of it. So you have Saturn, who's the God, who is Yahweh. He's the God of everything. And then the Elohim are the rest of the planets. It's all the planets together.
Yep. They're his archons or archangels, whatever you want to call it. But yes,
Correct.
That's correct. So that's
Miguel
Saturn.
Connor goes into a lot of that too in his Gnosis. I don't know if you watch him.
Miguel
Connor.
Oh, okay.
On Bite. I'll send you a link to his channel. It's wonderful.
So that's Saturn, and then you have Jupiter. It's polarity. Whereas I said how the Jews were very that they worship Saturn. They were looking for material side. Their mind was very focused on this material world. Now, whereas Jupiter comes in, the Piscean savior, Jesus and whatnot, that is the mind over the matter, where it opens you up to the higher planes to make the focus not so much on the material, but more on the mental, more on what's outside of this material realm.
So Saturn is left brain and Jupiter would be right brain.
100% correct. Jupiter would also be considered the feminine aspect, even though it is masculine in nature. To Saturn, it is Saturn's feminine counterpoint. 100% correct. Now I'm going to move on to Mars. I'm going to not so much use the one with the arrow, but I'm going to use the one with the cross above. Who is Mars? Mars is Aries. Mars is very much like Saturn, almost satanic in nature. Yeah. Mars is
the god of war, people.
That exactly.
This is why a lot of people with a lot of Aries placements, they're very, like aggressive. Hitler, a lot of the military people. I've got friends that I've grown up with that are Aries, and they're just, weapons, war, military. They're the god. This is the god of war.
Mars is the god of war, and that's what this symbol represents. This symbol is also the action principle. Mars represents a full-on patriarchal, masculine type mentality. It is action with brute force. Okay, and so what Mars, the god of war, represents is full-on masculine force in the material world. That's why you see the cross, you see the body over the circle, over the soul. Okay, so Mars represents the action principle of the soul. It is a brute force action. It is a masculine action. So material action over the soul. Now you go right next to Mars and you see Mars's counterpoint, which is Mars polarity, Venus, the complete opposite. Venus is feminine in nature. And look at these two symbols and just think of that saying.
Venus is the goddess of love, by the way.
Correct.
So you have Mars
Men
and
are
Venus,
from Mars,
the
women
god
are
of
from
war
Venus.
and the goddess of love right next to each other.
They're each other's polarity. And
Yes.
that, like I said, the expression men are from Mars, women are from Venus. If you notice,
Absolutely.
Mars is the exact symbol of the masculine, and Venus is the symbol everybody uses for feminine. It's male and female. Again, they are each other's polarity. And Venus is the soul over matter, because what Venus represents, being feminine, is represents in the mind aspect, represents compassion, empathy, sympathy, understanding. They're the feminine principles of the mind and of the soul. That's what Venus represents. Venus is, what else is Venus? Venus is Lucifer. If anybody, you being a Mason, should know this. If anybody's actually studied, I don't know if your viewers have studied Theosophy with Madame Blavatsky.
Madame Blavatsky.
Madame Blavatsky, in her writings, she actually claims that she associates Lucifer and the fallen angels actually with Venusians. She claims that they are from Venus.
Absolutely.
If anybody has ever
Absolutely.
read her work, that's why Lucifer,
especially when you're talking about Venus, because I talked about this in my videos. I talk about how Venus is Lucifer because he's the light bearer. What is the light bearer? Think about this for a second. What does the light bearer do? If you look out into the sky as the sun is very slowly coming up, so you just have that little shade of light above the sun. If you look above it, there's a very bright light above it. That's Venus. Venus brings the light, the sun, the God's only son, the only begotten son, the light of the world.
Venus is visible almost every night too, folks. For anybody who ever wants to go out and look at the stars at night, you can see Venus almost every single night.
Even further than that, Lucifer has a pentagram, right? Well, I'm not going to go into the pentagram because we could take up an hour and a half on that. But basically, astrologically, the pentagram is when you take Earth and Venus and you rotate it around the sun in a year's time. They almost connect at 5 points. So when you connect those 5 points, you get the pentagram.
Exactly. And that's also why Lucifer is always portrayed as very in a very feminine way. He always has the long flowing blonde hair. He almost looks like a female angel. He's always portrayed.
And you brought up the Mason thing too. And a lot of people will sit there and tell you the Masons are evil because of like Albert Pike's writings. But what you don't realize is when Albert Pike talked about Lucifer in his book, right? It was only like 2 or 3 sentences long. And when he was referring to Lucifer, he was referring to Venus because the initiated and the people understood these topics that we're going through. So when he was talking about Lucifer, he was referring to Venus, and people just took it literally.
Well, I've actually studied Masonry quite a bit. I read Anderson's Constitution, believe it or not. You know what that is, right? Okay. So this is excellent. Correct me if I'm wrong, but this is something that is well taught throughout the Masons. As far as Venus goes, as you can see, the symbol is the soul over matter. Now, when you think of Lucifer, you think of enlightenment. That makes you think of mind, correct? That makes you think of knowledge and wisdom. But, and this is one thing that is very profoundly taught in Masonry, is as far as I'm aware, knowledge in itself is neither good nor evil. There's no bad knowledge. It's not good, nor is it evil. It is completely neutral, like everything else in this realm, like fire, like water, like air. These are like even technology. These are neutral things. What determines whether or not knowledge is used for good or for evil is the soul of the person. That is why Venus is soul over matter. Yes, Venus does bring enlightenment. It brings wisdom and knowledge. That's the definition technically of what Lucifer is meant to be. But it is the knowledge, is the enlightenment of the soul. What you do, and that's actually where a lot of Masons throughout history went wrong. They took that knowledge, they took profound knowledge of the universe, and They used it for dark purposes. They used it for selfish purposes, not
Well,
selfless.
I always say this too. Like, I was raised Jewish. I have a problem with the Jewish religion, but like, I don't have issues with Jews themselves. But when it comes down to it, when it comes to the Jews, yeah, there's a lot of Jewish assholes out there. You
Yeah.
know, that doesn't mean the entire organization is for shit. That's not what that means. It just means that just like every other group that you could put together, there are going to be some good and some bad. It's the
Exactly.
polarity, it's the duality that we live on this plane, on Earth. There will always be good and evil. And
And
what
that
is talking about is basically alchemy. If you're looking at a symbol, because I've done Illuminati hand symbols before, right? I've done all this. I've done videos on this, guys. The things that I just flashed. These all come from good places, but when you invert or pervert it, when you ascribe something to it, you're alchemically changing it. So what happens is, for the swastika, for example, the swastika is astrology. The swastika is when you take Polaris, the North Star,
Polaris and the yep
and then you take the Big Dipper, and then you take it on the solstices and the equinox, take a
goes
picture.
around. Yes.
The swastika. But again, people take symbols and they attribute things to it, and we're never going to get the swastika back.
Absolutely. I know, because it was a beautiful symbol that meant, even in the Hindu traditions, it was a symbol that meant peace and enlightenment and things of that nature. And yes, it became perverted with the Aryan bloodline, you know. It became perverted with Nazi power and all that stuff. But Venus and Mars, that's what they represent. They are the two polarities of each other, whereas Mars is the masculine action aspect. Venus is the feminine, compassion, understanding aspect. Mars is matter over the soul, which is obviously, if you go that route, that will be, if you completely do matter over the soul, that's going to take you to a satanic route. Venus is complete soul over matter. If you do that, if you completely take everything with the soul and disregard the material, well, you're not going to have any grounding in this particular realm.
Right.
Too much of an extreme of either is not good. They have to be.
Absolutely.
There has to be a balance, and these two planets balance each other. That's why
And
they're
it's interesting too, because there was a book that came out in the 1800s by a writer named Anatole France. And I don't know if you've heard this, Lisa, but I suggest you pick up this book. It's called Revolt of the Angels. It was banned
No, I haven't, but it sounds great.
it was banned by the Catholic Church. And what it is it gives a humanist view of Lucifer leading the rebellion. And I'm not going to tell you more than that, but it's a very interesting read. And you're going to understand why the Catholic Church has literally it's still banned to this day.
Okay.
But you can get
What's
it.
called
The
again?
guy's Anatole France, and it's called Revolt of the Angels.
Revolt of the Angels. Okay, I'll remember that.
Guys, check that out. Anyway, let's continue.
So as you can see from what I started, you can see Saturn and Jupiter. Jupiter is Saturn's counterpart. That's why they are symbolically like that. Then you move on to Mars and Venus. You can see Venus is Mars's counterpoint. Now we're going to go on to my favorite. This is Mercury. Now, who is Mercury? Mercury is Hermes. He is Thoth. He is the god of wisdom, the god of enlightenment. He is the one who brings knowledge of the cosmos and of the soul to the people of Earth.
Incidentally, I just want to jump in real quick and just say one thing when you're talking about Thoth. I did an episode with the Cult Priestess on this. Billy Carson talks a lot about Thoth, and the Emerald Tablets, I've broken it down with astrotheology too. But it's important to know that Thoth is not Hermes. That's a big in this community. That is a big misconfiguration. That is a big issue that people don't seem to understand. Thoth is not Hermes. And if you want,
no, I thought they were what do you call it? I thought they were used not interchangeably, but I thought Thoth was the Egyptian version of the Greek Hermes. You know what I mean?
In the sense, well, Hermes is also Egyptian too, but in a sense, they've been conflated together, but they are not one and the same. And all you have to do is read the Emerald Tablets of Thoth, and then read the Quantum Hermetica, and you'll see the differences.
Well, for my research, as far as the Emerald Tablets goes, I think that was false. I don't think that they actually exist.
Well, that's one of the things that it came down to. Is it came down to the idea that if you read all the ancient writings, all of them,
yes,
we talk about an Emerald Tablet 1. One tablet,
That's what I was going
not,
to get into.
not
The
multiple ones.
Yes, the writings, the actual the writings ascribed to Hermes Trismegistus, they do exist. That is real.
Yes.
But the emerald tablets, and especially the guy who claims that he found them by astral traveling into what do you think? What do you go into a pyramid in Egypt, and he says he found them astrally, and then but that's why he can't take them in. I think that's all. I think that's all bullshit. You know what I mean? That whole story. I don't believe that these emerald tablets exist, but the writings of Hermes do exist, and
Yes,
that's what the
absolutely.
tablets are based off of.
I mean, the third Hermetic principle is the principle of vibration.
Yes.
Nothing rests, everything vibrates. And hello, 6,000 years later, what is string theory?
Now, it is a fact that Hermes is affiliated with the planet Mercury. Okay.
Yes.
And what does now I said Hermes is the god of wisdom, enlightenment. He brought the knowledge of the cosmos and of the soul to the earth. So, what is his symbol? And this is fantastic.
It's all three of them.
Symbol. It is all three of them. And in that order, it is the moon. It is the mind, because that's what Hermes did. He was the god of wisdom. What kind of wisdom and knowledge did he bring? He brought the knowledge of the soul, the next one, the circle underneath. And then what did he bring the knowledge of the mind and the soul to? He brought it to the physical realm of earth. So it is the moon, the sun, and the earth. It is in that trinity, mind, soul, and body, in that order. That is why Mercury is that symbol. So what is Mercury's counterpoint? So Mercury, the closest planet Mercury is to, is us. It is the earth, where all three of those are separate in physicality. Whereas to Mercury, they are combined. We are the counterpoint to, whereas Mercury can put all those together as a whole, where we view everything is separate. We view the mind as something else. We view the soul as something else. We view the body as something else material. So to combine that polarity and harmonize with it, Mercury is technically what the earth should harmonize with.
Let me
That's
go
why
back to.
everything
Let
is
me go
two.
back
There's
to.
two, two, and two. Just
Yeah.
as the sun is the counterpoint of the moon, the sun is masculine, the moon is feminine. They harmonize. Earth should harmonize with Mercury. I actually did not find any of that out until I found out what these symbols meant. And I think that, and I never knew that each two was the counterpoint of the other. And as you can see symbolically what they mean, and why they are drawn that way, that is why they're all, everything is two, two, and two, because it needs a balance, it needs a harmony. Everything does.
So when you're looking at Venus, right, and you're looking at the soul over the body, right?
Yes.
To me,
Yes.
when I think about that, I think of these like really, really, really deep monks that sort of almost like the breatharian ones that just spend their entire life meditating. And I don't know if you've ever seen this phenomena that happens, but their body actually petrifies at a point the soul leaves if they get into really deep meditation. And I don't know if you've ever seen a body just basically harden, but you're talking about the really skinny gurus that spend all their time on their soul and then they neglect their body.
Yes. Absolutely, especially with Shaolin and Tibetan monks.
Yes.
Practice this. Before, somebody made a comment one time under one of the previous videos. I think it might have been the first video that I did with you. And the comment that they said is because I had very briefly just mentioned Buddhism and Hinduism, and how I had mentioned how they are more closer to the truth on a spiritual level than the Abrahamic religions are. And they had mentioned that they wish I would go more into the Eastern religions. And I will say this, I don't know enough about them, but what I do know is, I will say this, one of the Eastern religions that is very, 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 probably one of the most truthful practices as far as understanding the cosmos and spirituality is Taoism. Taoism Taoism understands a universal balance like nothing else I know of. And it's funny because my boyfriend actually studies Taoism and he understands it very well. I have a hard time with it because it is he reads the Tao and the I Ching. You know what I mean? And I've read the I Ching, and they use more symbols in those Eastern traditions than they do in the Bible. Everything, like a mountain isn't a mountain; it means something else. A
I
river.
get those comments all the time too, where people are like,
Yes.
"When are you going to start going into Eastern religions, finding astrotheology?" I'm like, guys, I've been doing this since 2012. I've been breaking down texts, doing all these videos. I only started a YouTube channel after my first book was published by my publisher. I didn't do a YouTube before then. But for 12 years, I've been studying the West, and there's still so much more. If I go to the East right now, I'm going to literally start from scratch, and I'm not going to be able to bring you what I found. But I will eventually, at some point, get there.
You're Venusian, if I'm not mistaken, correct?
I am. I'm a Libra. I'm a Libra sun.
Yeah.
And I'm a Taurus moon, and both of those are ruled by Venus.
Let me tell you what's funny about astrology. This is actually what first got me into astrology. Like I said, I am a Pisces through and through by almost everything, the likes, the dislikes, the personality traits, all that. I am a typical Pisces. And it's funny because my counterpart, or my what compatible sign, let's say, everyone has two compatible signs, whereas yours being Venus, yours are being a Libra, yours are Aries and Sagittarius, more so Aries, because Aries is your direct counterpart. Mine
what I found that was interesting? Me and Santos Bonacci are exactly to the day 6 months apart.
Oh, that's awesome. My counterparts are, well, my compatible signs are Taurus and Virgo, Virgo being my counterpart. And here's what's funny. Every relationship that I've ever had, I've had 4 serious relationships my whole life. And by serious, I mean relationships that lasted well over a couple years, like let's say 3 years and beyond, I've had 4 serious relationships my whole life. And each person that I was involved with, I didn't find this out until later either, was either a Taurus or a Virgo. First person was a Virgo, second person was a Taurus, third person was a Taurus, and the person I'm with now is also a Virgo. Virgo is my counterpart. It's on the opposite side, just as Aries is on your opposite side. And it's funny because people, there is truth behind those teachings in astrology as far as compatibility goes, because I've never dated anybody determining what signs they are. It just happened to be that way.
Right.
But that is what the signs represent. So this next slide, what I'm going to talk about now is, we talked about the Exodus. Now, for the actual Exodus, there is evidence of a type of Exodus in Egypt, but it is not as it is recorded in the Bible. It took a very long time. What I'm going to go to in first is, as I said in a previous video, I had stated that the Israelites, the Jews, were actually the Canaanites. They came from Cana. Okay. Now, this is going to tell you how they came into Egypt.
I mean, I literally just did a video on this. We're talking about the alphabet and how it becomes the symbols for the zodiac. And
how the alphabet was the Greek and then the Phoenician letters.
Right. It's the Hebrew alphabet is the same as the Phoenician Canaanite, minus like a very, very, just like it's like the same letters, all of them. It's just some of them are cut short. Like instead of Lamed, it's Lam. So it's basically the same exact thing.
So we're going to start with the Hyksos. Who were the Hyksos people and the Hyksos kings? Well, this is who they were. The Hyksos meaning foreign rulers, or rulers of foreign lands, is a term in which modern Egyptology designates the kings of the 15th dynasty of Egypt. Okay. The seat of power of these kings was the city of Avaris in the Delta Nile region, the Nile Delta region, from where they ruled over Lower Egypt and Middle Egypt up to I think the word is Cusae, Cusae, up to Cusae.
Just so you guys know, this is about maybe 100 or 200 years before Akhenaten.
So, yes, you are correct. Now, these Hyksos, how it says right there, it says they had their seat of power in Avaris, which was the Nile Delta region. The Nile Delta region of Avaris was first claimed by the Canaanites. I had said in a previous video how Canaan was a very, very large region, and the people, as they multiplied, they spread out all over the lands. Avaris, Nile Delta, was one of the lands the Canaanites had settled in. When they settled there, and they settled there around the 12th dynasty, when Egypt was in their 12th dynasty, they settled there, and they called themselves the Hyksos, okay? But they were the Canaanites. Now, in the it's called the Egyptiaca. It is a history of Egypt written by the Greco-Egyptian priest and historian Manetho, Manetho. He was an Egyptian priest and historian in the 3rd century BC. The term Hyksos is used eth- eth- ethnic, I can't say it, is used ethnically,
Ethnically.
ethnically, yes, is used ethnically to designate people of probable West Semitic, Levantine origin.
When you guys hear the word Semite, you're automatically thinking anti-Semitism, anti-Jew. But what you don't understand is that the Arabs are Semites, and there's about
Exactly.
13 different groups that consider Semites.
Exactly. So the Hyksos is used to ethnically designate the people of probable West Semitic, uh, Levantine origin. While Manetho portrayed the Hyksos as invaders and oppressors, this interpretation is questionable in modern Egyptology. Instead, Hyksos rule might have been preceded by groups of the Canaanite peoples, who were the Hyksos, who gradually settled in the Nile Delta from the end of the 12th dynasty onwards, and who have seceded from the crumbling and unstable Egyptian control at some point during the 13th dynasty. And that is what they did. Now you gotta understand, every form of writing is biased to some degree. Everything that Micah writes, everything that I write, everything that every historian, church father, anybody writes is biased, and that bias will come from things we previously learned, previously read, right down to your own personal beliefs. Manetho, being that he was an Egyptian priest, he was biased to the Hyksos. He did not like them. So in his mind, they were portrayed as barbarians and barbaric rulers and whatnot. But it is very much more likely that they did not gain control in Egypt by force. What they did, and it's funny because what they did is what a lot of Canaanite people, whatever, is what a lot of them do now. What they did was they settled in Avaris, the Nile Delta region, and as Egypt was crumbling, as the pharaohs of Egypt and Egypt's leadership was crumbling on the inside from their own personal squabbles, what the Hyksos did was they kind of moved in and befriended the Egyptians and their customs, and they moved up in the ranks. They moved up. They befriended high priests of Egypt. They befriended the pharaohs. They started to, and then let me say, the Canaanites, they were a very intelligent people. They were experts in metallurgy. They were experts in using tools. They had knowledge of the stars, just like the Egyptians did, but they had more knowledge
Well, how
of,
do you think they supposedly built a giant golden calf in the middle of the desert?
well, that, yeah.
We'll get to Exodus, though. But anyway.
But they had more knowledge of constructing and working tools, even more so than the Egyptians did. And they used a lot of their knowledge. As I said, they befriended high priests, worked their way up from there to the pharaohs, and eventually, with their knowledge and their customs, as they befriended the higher echelon of the Egyptian rule, they kind of slowly put themselves on the throne and they took over. And it wasn't done by violence or brute force. It was done just as they say people do today, or they say, what was it, like the in what they say, like the Khazars did, how they moved in and they put people here and put people there. They gain knowledge, they move up in ranks of society, and then boom, they put themselves on the throne. These are the Canaanites were a very intelligent group of people. They were not stupid.
I like this line here where it says they have been credited with introducing several technological innovations to Egypt, such as the horse and chariot, as well as the sickle, sword, and the composite bow, a theory which is disputed. But think about this for a second. What is the horse in astrology?
Oh, it's Sagittarius.
That's Sagittarius. But what you don't know is that in 150 AD, Ptolemy listed 48 constellations they knew about at the time, which goes back even further. The chariot, okay, is a constellation called Auriga, which is in Gemini. And the chariot, Gemini, and the horse, Sagittarius, are opposing signs. So it's as above, so below. The composite bow, that would be Sagittarius too.
Okay, you actually just read that part. Okay, so the Hyksos period marks the first time in Egypt that it was ruled by foreign rulers. Many details of their rule, such as the extent of their kingdom and even the names of and the order of their kings, remain uncertain. But the Hyksos practiced many Levantine or Canaanite customs as well as Egyptian customs. And then you read the part they were credited of introducing technology. Now, what the Hyksos did, the Canaanites, when they took over, when they took over by the 15th dynasty was when they began to rule, they amalgamated their worship and their gods with the Egyptians. They still worshipped El and Baal and Moloch and Asherah, but they also worshipped Ra and Osiris and Isis and Horus. They kept their own, but not to destable anything in
Right.
Egypt. They kept it, well, they kind of amalgamated them together.
You
The
guys have to understand that Egypt was such a long history. We're only what 248 years as a country here. Egypt was so long that they literally had two different sun gods. They had Osiris and they had Horus. Things have evolved. It is such a long history that you have to wade through.
The Hyksos did not control all of Egypt. Instead, they coexisted with the 16th and 17th dynasty, because remember, the Hyksos became in power in the 15th dynasty. They coexisted with the 16th and 17th dynasties, which were based in Thebes. Warfare between the Hyksos and the Egyptian pharaohs of the late 17th dynasty eventually culminated in the defeat of the Hyksos by Amos I, who was the founder of the 18th dynasty of Egypt. In the following centuries, the Egyptians would portray the Hyksos as bloodthirsty and oppressive rulers. That's not so much the case. Okay. In his epitome of Manetho, Josephus connected the Hyksos with the Jews. Now, Josephus used a lot of Manetho's writings. He used a lot of them in his own work.
Josephus is the guy, guys. He's a first century historian that Christians will point to for proof of the evidence of Christ.
Yes.
They will go to Josephus first and foremost.
Now, Josephus, he connected the Hyksos with the Jews, but he also called them Arabs. In their own epitomes of Manetho, the late antique historian Sextus Julius Africanus and, this is an important one, Eusebius say that the Hyksos came from Phoenicia until the excavation and discovery of Teledabas, which was the site of the Hyksos capital in Avaris. In 1966, historians relied on these accounts for the Hyksos period. Now, where it says modern historians, material finds at Teledabas indicate the Hyksos originated in Levant. The Hyksos' personal names indicate that they spoke a Western Semitic language and may be called, for convenience sake, Canaanites. Now, before you scroll up, what happened was, like I said, the Levant is the Avaris Nile Delta region. They were Canaanites. They were the Hyksos. They gradually went to Egypt. So basically the Canaanites became the Hyksos, who took power and ruled Egypt from the 15th to the 18th dynasty. Then, when they were conquered,
just for posterity, Lisa, can you tell us how long of a time period that was so people could really understand this?
What, the 15th
From
to
the
the
15th to the 18th?
I'm not sure if you scroll up, it actually did say it.
Oh.
It actually said it further up. I'm not 100% sure, but
okay.
But anyway, they so the Canaanites became the Hyksos. They took power of they ruled Egypt from 15th to the 18th dynasty. When the leader of the 18th dynasty, Pharaoh Amos I, conquered them, that was the start of the biblical Exodus. He conquered now this is going to get interesting. He conquered the Hyksos, and what he did, they did not all just flee. They did not all leave. Some of them remained as indentured servants. They were not like, whips and chains, hardcore slaves. They were treated well, and they that's why they stayed in Egypt. Many of them retreated back to the Levant area, to Avaris, where they originally came from, and they settled there. Many of them, this isn't listed, but this is information that I know from reading other sources, many of them wandered around the desert region for quite a while. Many of the Hyksos did after the Hyksos kings, after they were thrown out of Egypt, they wandered around the desert. Guess where they settled? Jerusalem. They are the Canaanites, who were the Hyksos, who ruled Egypt for a while, became the rulers of the 15th to the 18th dynasty, became the Israelites, who
Wow.
became the Jews. That's why they were the king. So when you say that Yahweh was originally a Canaan, that's why when they talk about, oh, we want Israel back, we want, that's Israel is the Israel and Judea, whatever you want to call it, is the land of the Jews.
Mhm.
That's Canaan. That's where they're from. They want Canaan back. You know what I mean? That's why. It's not because Yahweh promised them that land. It's because that's where they're from. That's what they think is their own land, even though it was conquered many times by many different rulers, Persia, the Ottoman Empire, the Byzantine, so on and so forth. But the Israelites were, so Yahweh is in fact a Canaanite God. That's what, so now, like I said, the Exodus, and that is the story of the beginning of the Exodus, was when Pharaoh Amos threw out the Hyksos tribe. They started an Exodus. Okay. Now, where does Moses come into play? Scroll up. In Manetho's writings, in his documented writings, he speaks of a man named Osarseph. Now, Osiris is a legendary figure of ancient Egypt who has been equated with Moses. His story was recounted by the Ptolemaic Egyptian historian Manetho in his um, uh, Aegyptica, which was the first half of the 3rd century BC. Manetho's work is lost, but the 1st century AD Jewish historian Josephus quotes extensively from it. And also, it doesn't say, but also, so does Eusebius. We'll get into that in a moment. The story depicts Osarseph as a renegade Egyptian priest who leads an army of lepers and other unclean people against a pharaoh named Amenophis, who was the son of Ramses and the father of Ramses. Now, remember, in the biblical stories, they claim that Ramses was the one with, the pharaoh who was the pharaoh leading during the time of Exodus and the Moses. Okay, so this is how that ties into it.
Wasn't Ramses also, correct me if I'm wrong, who supposedly was the one that they built the pyramids for?
I'm not sure. I'm not 100%, but so Amenophis, whose original name was Sethos or Seti. The pharaoh was driven out of the country, and the leopard army, in alliance with the Hyksos. Now, remember, many of the Hyksos were already driven out of Egypt. Some stayed as indentured servants. Some were the lepers and the unclean people that he's talking about there. These are the Hyksos, okay? So the leopard army, in alliance with the Hyksos, whose story is also told by Manetho, ravaged Egypt, committing many sacrileges against the gods before Amenophis returned and expels them. Towards the end of the story, Osarseph changes his name to Moses. Now, this next line is very interesting because it pertains to what you talk about, Micah. It says, is the question of what, if any, historical reality might lie behind the Osarseph story. An influential study by Egyptologist Jan Assmann, funny name, has
Yeah,
suggested that no single historical incident or person lies behind this legend, and that it represents instead a conflation of several historical traumas, notably the religious reforms of Akhenaten.
correct.
Basically, when monotheism, or basically when polytheism was being changed to monotheism. Now,
Akhenaten started that, guys.
that is correct.
1367 BC.
That is correct.
Akhenaten told everybody, we worship the sun. That is God. We have one worship. And I also say that Moses gets his name from Tuthmosis.
Yes. Now, don't scroll up yet, but this is interesting. Now, the Egyptian historian Manetho claims that there was an actual person who led. Now, again, this is part of the Exodus story that's still going on. This is over 100 years later. So this is pertained in the story still. So was there a man named Osarseph, as Manetho says, who led some what they call lepers? And the reason they say lepers and unclean people That's how Manetho describes this, because he was biased. He didn't like the Hyksos. Okay.
Right.
But I don't have it listed here, but if people do their own research and they want to read up on what Manetho wrote about Osarsiph, it says that he was an Egyptian priest, and he very much was, he very much sided with Akhenaten's view of monotheism.
Mm-hmm.
He was very much, proliferated the belief in one God above all, not many gods, and
Mm-hmm.
so did the lepers or the Hyksos followers of his.
Mm-hmm.
So Manetho says that he changed his name to Moses, and this is who the biblical Moses was. But as you can see, even if he is historical, the Egyptologist below thinks that he wasn't historical, and like he said, it's a bunch of different events, and several different traumas
Yeah.
in the human consciousness about Akhenaten's rule and his change of polytheism to monotheism.
I'm
But
not
if
gonna lie, I kind of side with the ass man on this.
right? But if there was an actual person that led a small group of Hyksos, now these Hyksos would have been the indentured servants that stayed, that remained, that did not go to Levant and did not go to Jerusalem yet.
Mm-hmm.
But there's other. If you read Manetho's transcripts, he says he actually called upon the Hyksos that were from that were back in Levant and Avaris. He called upon them to join them to basically try and overthrow the Egyptian pharaoh Amenophis at the time. And then
Mm-hmm.
that's the story of of Moses in the Exodus. But it wasn't one event that happened because Yahweh said, "Free my people," and turned a staff into a snake. None of that happened. These are actual documented historical events written by an Egyptian historian. And he was not religious. He did not write these as religious texts.
I got to
He
tell you
wrote,
something else that this just triggered in my mind
go
about
ahead.
Passover dinner. I sat at Passover dinners, and I'm not going to say who said this because they're close to me, but they're a very strong believer. And I was told from a young age that the plague of the frogs
Mm-hmm.
was a mistranslation, and I don't know who they got this from. I don't know if it was Rashi or another one of the sacred scholars.
What was it supposed to be?
What?
What was it supposed to be? What was the mistranslation?
It was misunderstanding. That God sent one enormous frog, and that when the Egyptians started beating it, it started to divide into smaller frogs.
Very interesting. Never heard that one.
That's what I was taught.
But so here's where it gets even more interesting. Now, as I said, Manetho, he did not write religious text. He wrote this as records of history, not as religious text. He writes nothing religious. He writes no parables, no stories. He strictly wrote this as documentation of Egypt's history.
Mm-hmm.
Now, it's, as you can see, Josephus quoted quite a bit from Manetho's works. Eusebius also agreed with Manetho's work. Eusebius is also known for quoting from a previous, even older historian than Manetho. There is a Phoenician historian. I mentioned it before. I couldn't pronounce his name right, but I got it now. It's called Sanchuriathon. Sanchuriathon is the name of a Phoenician historian, way back in early BC, older than Manetho. Sanchuriathon, in his writings, and he did not do religious writings, he tried to document history. If anybody has the time, I'll get the spelling of the name and I'll say it correctly. Sanchuriathon.
Mm-hmm.
What he documented was the Egyptian gods and goddesses and their belief, and also their what do you call it, their politics as well. He did the Greeks, he did the Canaanites, the Phoenicians, all of Mesopotamia, and he wrote in Sanchuriathon's writings, he wrote that the God of the Jews, Yahweh, is undoubtedly the same God as that the Greek is the same God that the Phoenicians called El. He is also the same god that the Greeks called Kronos, and he is the same god that the Romans called Saturn. He wrote that as documented historical evidence. Eusebius read that and said, 100% that is true. Eusebius wrote letters stating that that is true. He also states that Manetho's story that the Hyksos were actually the Jews. He states that that is true, just like Josephus did. And the other historian that was mentioned, Sextus, what was it? Sextus, Justinian Africanus, also states that Manetho historical evidence is accurate. Now, Eusebius, who is known as not a church father, but a church historian, he is known as the father of church history, of Catholic church history. So why is the father of church history proclaiming that all the biblical stories are 100% accurate when he is going back and saying that Sanachariathon is correct in saying that Yahweh is really Saturn and Kronos and El? He is saying that Manetho's writings and Manetho's documentation of the Hyksos people who were really the Jews is accurate as well. Now scroll up, and here's why. Here's a famous quote from Eusebius. It is an act of virtue to deceive and lie, when by such means the interests of the church might be promoted.
Wow.
Yes. So these are the people that, again, and if anybody does research on Eusebius, he was very big under Constantine. He was whatever he almost looked at Roman Emperor Constantine almost as like a savior. Whatever Constantine wanted, whatever promoted the papacy and the Roman Catholic Church at that time, Eusebius was right there for it. He promoted whatever Constantine wanted to go. So and that's what Catholicism basically was. Catholicism was a political movement. We discussed this before, how what they did was they took the Old Testament religion of the Jews and the New Testament, which was more Greek than anything, and they combined it together for a political movement so that the Jews wouldn't revolt and the Romans stay happy, because now we have our Greek/Roman religion we can still hold, and the Jews have their religion. So they took the New Testament, which was predominantly Greek and Roman, and said, okay, we're going to make that the secondary part. We're going to make that the secondary savior part of your Jewish Canaanite Old Testament. We're going to say that everything that you guys believed, our New Testament is the causality of those. Everything that the Jewish religion and Canaanite religion predicted, our Greek and Roman religion is the answer to those predictions. You wanted a savior, here's your savior. You predicted these signs and wonders, here's these signs and wonders. We're just going to put it together, and now you have Christianity or Catholicism.
People always talk about how Jesus fulfilled 700 prophecies or 5,000 prophecies that were in the Old Testament, and that's why we believe in him. Do you know how easy it is for me to write a book and then write a sequel to it and then take from my first book the storyline so that it continues?
Oh yeah. You know? And again, I know you don't subscribe to a historical Jesus. Me, I could go either way. I don't know if there was a historical Jesus, but I am not firm on that. I am open-minded to the belief that there was somewhat, perhaps a man who went
for
around.
starters, when he's to be born, they're told he's to be called Emmanuel. Secondly, when he comes out and they call him Yeshua, because he wasn't Jesus, because J didn't come into the alphabet until
Yeshua, his name would have been Joshua, technically, in English.
Exactly, because in Hebrew, Y-E is J. Jonathan is Jonathan. Yaakov is
Joseph
Jacob.
is Joseph, yes.
Exactly. Yosef is Joseph. Yes. Yeshua would be Joshua.
That is correct. But I'm open-minded to believe that perhaps there was a man named Joshua or Yeshua who did go around and teach such things. But his life is how the Bible portrays his life is a 100% allegory of the son's rotation through the zodiac.
Right.
100%. Some people think, here's a rabbit hole, interesting if any of your viewers would like to go down. Some people think that the actual historical Jesus was actually the son of Cleopatra and Julius Caesar, Caesarion. That's an interesting rabbit hole if anybody wants to go down. They think that that is possibly the historical Jesus because he studied the ancient Egyptian mystery schools as long, and also traveled to Tibet and learned the Hindu and Tibetan mysteries as well. And they
I'm not gonna lie, I've been trying to put together a list of 5 people, alive or dead, I would love to talk to, and I think Elon Musk would be one. He wouldn't be the first, obviously, but I'm just naming them out of order. Elon, Leonardo da Vinci would be 2, and I would have to put Cleopatra up there too. She was brilliant.
But anyway, this is where you get, so as you can see, this is where you get the biblical Exodus story from. There was in fact an Exodus from Egypt. The Canaanite people, who are the Jews, yes, they did slowly, they settled in Avaris, which is the Nile Delta region, and yes, they slowly moved into Egypt. But I bet what many, it doesn't mention in the Bible though, have the Israelites once ruled Egypt, does it? Because they portray it as how they were only the slaves, and you can scroll up, you can keep going, how they were only the slaves and almost like victimized, you know. But
Well, I
that is,
think we're at about an hour and 6 minutes. What I think I
oh,
want
okay,
to
here,
do.
I'll blow through this real quick.
No. What I want to do is I want to continue with the kind of conversations we have, but I think I'm going to break this down into 2. So what I will do is we'll take a pause real quick.
Okay.
I'm going to end this and we're going to continue. I'm going to send you a new link and we're going to record part 2 and I'll put these up in 2 days.
Okay. Sure. Just to let people know what part 2, the part 2 is about. What I'm going to talk about in this part is Nimrod and Semiremis, and what that goes on, and what that is about is I'm going to show how these characters that people call ancient gods and goddesses, Nimrod, because people heard of the trilogy Nimrod, Semiramis, and Tammuz. No, it's all a myth. They are based on actual historical kings and queens of, or king and queen of Assyria. But I'm going to explain how ancient kings and queens who did tremendous things and had a lot of power were looked upon by the people as ancient gods and goddesses, and how over time stories about them assimilated with the constellation and gods and goddesses of the heavens, and how they became allegorically intertwined, and real people, real kings and queens, became the myths and legends and deified goddess and goddesses that we know today.
I can't wait. So thank you guys for watching. This is going up today.
Great.
This will go up now. Part 2, we're going to record. So don't go anywhere, Lisa. And thanks, guys, for watching. I hope this has been very, very, very interesting for you guys.
I hope everybody enjoys it. The next part should be really good, too.
Okay, great.